Hello, and welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about Blizzard Entertainment. Before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games. And mostly we're talking about the design and the development thereof, or we're talking about what we've been playing and all of the rest of that. But for today's episode, there are two pieces of, just like stuff that hit news that are particularly sort of like interesting. One of which is topical because it just came out. This is the Jeff Kaplan, Lex Friedman 5.5 hour interview. Jeff Kaplan goes extremely deep into his history with Blizzard and what the decisions were, what kind of things, where certain decisions came from, why things came out the way that they did, all of the rest of that. It has been all over sort of social media, so we want to talk about that. And then a couple of years ago, so I guess 2 or 3 years ago at this point, Jason Shrier put together a book called Play Nice, which is the rise, the fall, and the future of Blizzard Entertainment, which is basically him cataloging through just an insane number of interviews with an insane number of staff about like what the backroom workings of the company was really like for those, 30 years of its sort of life cycle, both of which create a really interesting and kind of complex window into, I would probably say, like one of the premier pillars of video game development history. Right? Maybe I think I would probably make the argument. I'm going to just make the argument that I want to make, right? Which is that I would probably say that Blizzard is the most important company in video game development in terms of like the people who understand its sort of decision making and inner workings and all of the rest of that, right? Obviously, it doesn't make the most important products or the best products or any of the rest of those kinds of things, but I think more people understand the sort of the history, the culture, the people behind the scenes, the sort of names of individual developers behind Blizzard games and probably any other game I can think of. Would you hit that? Would you agree with me on that?
It probably depends.
I'm trying to carve out a thing because I think the obvious answer, if I say the most important video game company of all time, it's Nintendo. You can't get around that. So I'm trying to.
I was going to say Valve.
Oh, really? Oh my God, that's actually super interesting. Yeah, I think I would go Nintendo before Valve any day of the week. Well, and I would definitely go Blizzard, I think, before Valve too, even though Steam is so important.
Yeah, I would say
is so important.
It depends on how you slice the cake, right? Like, like Nintendo is important, Valve is important, Blizzard is important, right? Like, but it's definitely one of the marquee companies, right? Especially in this kind of like in the book, Shrier has this quote that's like, "We want to be a company where we can sell a box of rocks with Blizzard Entertainment on it and people will buy it." And they were that company for a long time. And so I definitely think that there's, in terms of like shared cultural gestalt for, I'm going to say shared cultural gestalt for hardcore game, like for like enthusiast gamers, maybe is the right way to put it, right? I think Blizzard's definitely that company, right? Because Nintendo's a little bit wider, right? Like, and Valve is more infrastructure at this point than anything else, just because like they make games, but like, and they make games that are like influential and important, but not to the same degree that Blizzard does.
I would certainly say that in terms of practicality, Valve actually, you would make a very convincing argument for Valve just by being the people to create the premier online PC distribution storefront. Right. So for instance, obviously my whole job is about understanding the Steam storefront and using it to sell indie games, right? And you can extract out or extrapolate out from there so many other sort of pieces of kind of the pie, right? You just would not have the kind of indie game renaissance that I've argued, we've been living in for the last 10 years without the way that Valve has chosen to shepherd that space. And in a world where Activision or EA or Microsoft or someone hit that online PC storefront first, I think we're just like living in a completely different world. And so I would absolutely agree that, in terms of just like raw kind of consequentialist sort of impact, Valve, you can make a very easy answer for Valve, I think. And then Nintendo, I think, is just about the history, right? Like, because the history stretches back so far. And just kind of the way, I don't know, in a certain sense, consoles are kind of their own beast, almost, because like it's little comparing kind of like apples and oranges. But really the thing that I think Blizzard stands kind of head and shoulders above are the ids of the world, right? Like, I think id Software is incredible, is an amazingly important part of history, but they're a flash in the pan, right? It made Doom, and Doom is, easily one of the top 10 most influential video games of all time. But where did they go after that? Quake, and then kind of fizzling out into not much else, right? Or you can make similar arguments around, like, I don't know.
I wouldn't say it is a flash in the pan, but I will agree with you that it's not as big or as consistent as Blizzard is, right? And not in a way that like feels like they're all part of the same coherent company, right? Like
that's fair. I am shitting a little bit on it, but they did own the 90s for
Yeah. I would say the only other company that I think has the same kind of consistency in terms of like, like this is a Blizzard game, right? Like the only other person I could think of is like Hideo Kojima, right? Like, is like, you can.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think Hideo is the premier auteur of the video game space.
Well, I think there are definitely others. Suda51 would be an easy answer, right? And I think you could make a very. I don't think it's a hard leap to go. Blizzard is the exact same thing, right? Like these are auteur-driven kind of games in a certain sense, like basically because of Chris Metzen.
See, I don't think that's the case. I think that.
Really?
I think the stronger case is that like Blizzard is the biggest kind of like normal video game. Normal is maybe the wrong way to put this, but like Hideo Kojima games are weird, right? Like Blizzard games are kind of like foundational in a lot of ways, right? Like Diablo is the progenitor action RPG, right? ARPG, right? Starcraft is the apex maybe RTS, right? World of Warcraft is the theme park MMO, right? And like the defining, everything else is in its shadow. And I don't think a lot of other companies have games, like as many games in that kind of place, right? Like, like in I think I could just leave it there, right? I don't think there's anybody else that has like as many kind of this is what this genre is games as Blizzard does.
The auteur thing that I think I'm keying into is a little bit like film. I also just want to say in the chat, hello to our good friend Akshay, first all caps world tour song. And also hello to Freak. Hey, how you doing? In terms of the auteur thing, I actually think you can make an extremely strong case, and I probably am going to make this case on this podcast, right? That like, really at the end of the day, Chris Metzen is like one of these video game auteurs, like Hideo Kojima. It just so happens that there's a whole company that is sort of framed around him, right? In a way that Kojima never really made that sort of a relationship with like a company in the same sort of way. Does that make sense? So, for instance, I think you could make the case also for I don't even remember these fucking guys' names.
I think Metzen is a great storyteller and like a world crafter, but I don't think he has the same kind of like full Monty kind of like directorship that Hideo does, right? Like,
okay,
like I think Hideo controlled Metal Gear Solid and the Death Stranding games from top to bottom so thoroughly in a way that I think is kind of unparalleled in the industry. But
the comparison I'm drawing is to somebody like Todd Howard. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Todd Howard is just a fucking suit essentially at the end of the day.
At this point.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure, right? Like, whereas in my mind, someone like Chris Metzen is not, right? I think more people knew Chris Metzen than they did J. Allen Brack, for instance, who was running
Sure.
the WoW team kind of in concert with him for a long time, right? Or, for instance, even Mike Morhaime, who is CEO of Blizzard, right? Like, the designer, this creative guy, was the face of the sort of the company and the world and the story and all of this other kind of stuff in a way that reminds me of Kojima, I guess. Even if Kojima is like, I would definitely agree with you, because obviously Metzen isn't really making like design choices, right? Like, Metzen is out there saying, well, I think a monk's jab should be this and tiger kick should be that, obviously, right? Like, he's talking about, all of this other sort of stuff, but
yeah, this is interesting because I think this is actually, before the show we were talking about another video that I had shown to Buddy about Kathleen Kennedy being the central thesis of this. Kathleen Kennedy was a great producer but not a great executive, and I think this is interesting because Morhaime and Todd Howard are executives, and I think they're pretty, Morhaime is no longer involved with Blizzard, but I think Todd's a pretty competent executive, right? Like, which is just a different skill set, but it's also like not the type of person that you get like a Tor type acclamations for, right? So,
yeah.
And famously, Hideo Kojima was terrible at business. Like, he basically took no kind of stock at Konami, which was a problem because he kept delaying his fucking games and costing that company tons of money, which is why they eventually split off from him, right? Like, or they eventually got rid of him because he was uncompromising in his vision and had no financial stake in the company. And so,
Well, the intersection of sort of the business of games and the creative of games definitely comes up quite a lot in both of these things. Maybe to start with like the Lex interview, both of us sort of had a similar sort of reaction, which is that Lex Friedman's a pretty poor. He's a good interviewer in the sense that he sort of gives Jeff a microphone and lets the guy talk, and then Jeff is pretty charismatic and is telling a very compelling sort of story. But I felt like Lex Friedman didn't really offer that much in terms of kind of guiding that experience in the way that you would expect a sort of talented podcast interviewer to.
Yeah, like he does. How do I want to put this? Like, at the end of the day, he's kind of like I don't understand how you like watch Lex Friedman unless he just kind of like always has banger guests, because 100% of the content is on the guest, which is good at a certain level, right? Like, I think of some of the podcasters I listen to, and I don't need like Ben Dreyfuss's takes on, like if Ben Dreyfuss was doing this interview, I would want him to talk about as much as Lex Friedman did, because I want to hear from Jeff Kaplan, right? Even if I think Ben Dreyfuss is a better podcast host, but
yeah, the part that I feel like I'm missing, and I did happen to watch both of these in close succession, so it's a very easy comparison on my mind. Have you seen the new Louis Theroux documentary on Netflix?
No.
It's like Inside the Manosphere or something like that. Yeah, basically Louis Theroux interviews a bunch of these sort of like, whatever. They all have different sort of like terms for themselves, but he is really good at on the fly asking incisive questions that make those guys look like fucking idiots, right? Like he's in front of a guy and his girlfriend, and the guy has told him when the girlfriend wasn't around that he wanted to have multiple wives, and so he brings that up when the girlfriend is there, and the girlfriend says, well, I don't really think I would be into that, and now the guy looks like an idiot, and it's just like very simple thing, right? But like that's a skill. A good interviewer has this skill, this ability to sort of just really ask the right question at the right time to sort of get a really cool, interesting answer. I don't think Lex Friedman really ever did that with Jeff Kaplan, but Jeff Kaplan did give plenty of cool, interesting answers along the way. So, good for him, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah. But was there anything in particular you wanted to highlight about the interview?
I don't know. There's a lot that's interesting that I guess is going on. There's a thing that happens in both books, or both things, right? Where they talk about these early halcyon days of Blizzard, and I don't know if you have this, I feel like a tremendous sense of like yearning in a weird way for that feeling. Do you know what I mean? And I think this is what is kind of like underlying some of those, I don't know, some of those, like the core culture that people care about or are interested in. But the idea of like this always on sort of like workplace where everybody is contributing to design decisions and working really hard and you're hanging out and playing pranks on each other or whatever. This is, I actually think, part of what the Blizzard mythos relies upon in order to be fun and inviting and draw people sort of in. The reason that people take big pay cuts to work at Blizzard is because of, at that time, that sort of culture where you are going to go out with a bunch of executives for lunch and talk about playing, EverQuest, because everybody's all playing EverQuest together or whatever else sort of thing. Anyway, I describe that as yearning. I feel like if I could have a perfect sort of job environment, it would feel like that. Is that something that you feel? Or are the so fucking obvious downsides to that too overpowering?
Yeah, I have never been there. I could see something like that being fun. Especially in like my 20s, right? Like,
oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I also like the other part of this is like everybody working 12 to 16 hour days, right? Like,
yeah.
And doing it because they want to, right? Like this is not nobody's this only becomes a problem later when people feel like they're forced to, right? Whereas like in the beginning, everybody's kind of willingly doing it, but like, I don't know if I was ever about that kind of life, right? Like, especially for like, I have known people who have lived that life and they have reaped the rewards of that life, right? And the thing that was kind of fundamentally that painted Blizzard in a much poorer light to me was the revelation that basically nobody besides like the top level people got to reap the rewards of that kind of stuff because they just were stingy about handing out equity essentially, right? Which is kind of like perspective from my world, right? Like I have worked at small companies, but they were business to business products that were like you were in it. No one was there because they had a passion for like in the first company I worked for, case for hotel reputation management, right? They were there because they thought the product was good and they were getting equity. And the hope was that if, they got acquired, they would get a big payout. Right.
Yeah.
I currently work at a very large company, we'll talk about this later, but like a lot of the stuff that they talk about around or that Jason Shrier talks about around the pandemic, like basically a lot of those things happened word for word exactly the same at Google while I was there. I am still there, but like, the same type of kind of like, full remote to back in the office to laying off a bunch of people because they overhired during the pandemic, right? Like that all happened at Google too. And a lot of like the difference is that they pay you a lot less at Blizzard, right? Like, among, I can get to more of this later, but the parallels there are pretty striking. But I don't see a world where I want to do that now. And the reasons for that are probably a little bit more complex, right? Like I am the primary breadwinner in my house, and so like I don't want to get paid a lot less for a passion project. I want to have a stable, dependable income for like my middle age type of deal. And so how about this? I interviewed with Blizzard when I was like 23, I want to say, and I got pretty far along. I got an on-campus interview, to be an engineering test. And I did not make it past that final stage, but I have thoughts as to why that was. I think there is a world where I would have really enjoyed that job had I gotten it. But I don't think I am there anymore. And I think you see this happen with kind of across the story of Blizzard. But I'll let you say your piece first.
Yeah, the interesting thing, so there's a part of this that I think is just built into my DNA in a way. Like, it reminds me of, so I used to essentially crunch in high school for the musical and like plays and stuff like that. Basically, when I was in high school, the high school opened at 7 a.m. and it closed at 11 p.m., right? And for the duration of basically that whole winter, I just didn't leave the high school until 11 p.m. because you'd do all of your classes, and then you would go to the auditorium, and I was performing in the musical, so I would do my rehearsal for performance, and then I would work on stage crew until the end of the night, right? And part of this is that I was like a latchkey kid, right? You know, I could just do this kind of stuff. Nobody really cared. And I don't know, I guess my dad, I think if I were to ask my dad what he thinks, he probably would have said it was pretty good for, you know, like for me or whatever. But that feeling of just like you and a bunch of your friends are like working on this thing together and everybody is just living and breathing the thing every day. That is such an attractive sort of like feeling. God, that's so fun. Right. And I have done this because obviously, so I work in the video game industry. And I would say I've crunched hard twice in my life, right? The first was when I first got hired at Square Enix, and it was, you know, A Realm Reborn. I was crunching an insane amount for when A Realm Reborn hit because nobody expected the relaunch for Final Fantasy XIV to be as big as it was, which was an insanely fun, you know, hyper engaging time. But I definitely, in a certain sense, I did reap the financial rewards in the sense that I was tremendously in debt at the time. Actually, not tremendously. It was like 4 figures. It was like $6,000 in debt or whatever, but that was a huge amount, okay, at the time. And crunching Final Fantasy is how I was able to climb my way out. And then later at Akupara, I would say that I crunched all the time at Akupara. But that was just because I was being paid hourly and no one told me to stop working. And it was just so easy and so inviting to just keep working, to just put in a couple of extra hours here and there, right? Like, oh, actually, this weekend, I have no plans. I'm going to just like catch up on all of these things because there's so much, you know, like so much like work to be done. Eventually, we standardized against kind of a crunching culture at Akupara that I would say that we like no longer sort of live in or anything like that. But both of those times also felt kind of great, and I sort of loved them in like a truly detrimental way that I recognize is probably bad and that I ought not to think this way, but also it's just like, God, it's so fun to live in a world where just like you are so subsumed into this thing. It's like, I think if I were to put a very modern term to it, it is basically like business hyperfocus, right? Like it takes advantage of people's propensity for hyperfixation on a thing, and then you get paid for that hyperfixation, kind of. And there's something like really, I don't know, just like really enticing about that. But also, I think I did both of that when I did both of those when I was in my 20s, right? And now I'm in my 30s, and I feel like now I have no problem logging off at the end of the week with like a lot of undone work, and I say I will get to it next week. I don't care, right? When before I used to I would just work, I would just keep working. I just wouldn't care, and I would just keep going, and I would rack up, you know, insane hours on a weekly basis to get through to the other side.
Yeah, no, I do not have that, or I did not have that impulse, and I have not been in an environment that would be conducive to that kind of impulse. But you know, that's me, I guess.
Yeah. I also think I would have hated it if we had done it in Irvine and they were buying pizza all the time and it was bad pizza. I think I would have been furious. I think I would have hated that so much.
Yeah.
Part of, you know. You know.
I'm actually, this is an interesting part of it too, because my impression is that part of the rewards here for doing this was also like, you know, oh, the executives are taking everybody to Vegas to the strip club and also getting everybody like, you know, drunk off of their fucking asses, right? Like, you know, and I've the strip club part I have not been privy to, but like, you know, alcohol driven startup culture I have been part of at some point, right? Like I spent a lot of Friday nights in San Francisco with coworkers, you know, out at a bar and kind of like, as like a formal or semi-formal kind of team building type thing. And that was fun, but I also kind of don't necessarily want to do that again. Right. Like, I've aged a little bit out of some of that at least. Does that change your inflection on this at all?
Definitely. I definitely think I would have hated that part. Because I have I have no interest in a strip club, and I have no interest in. There's actually quite a lot from those early days that is very like terrible, I would say. So, for instance, there's a number of stories about pornography in the Jason Shrier book that I find maybe like at best disturbing and at worst criminal. Do you know what I mean? Which is just kind of like, holy fuck, how did that exist in a real company, in a company that is so lauded, right? But the answer is it's just a bunch of guys, and the environment is basically a frat house, right?
Well, not only that, but there's also enough implicit trust to like take people at kind of like their intentions than rather at
yeah.
And I think I said this before the podcast, but like when you have a small enough company that you can vet every single person and figure out if that person is going to be chill or not, essentially, right? Like you can get away with a lot of stuff, and you could build some pretty spectacular products, right? Like based on kind of like individual talent and individual kind of thoughts, but that doesn't scale, right? Like you cannot have a large tech-sized company with those processes running, because you can't screen for culture that way. You can't screen for like, individual talent that way. You can't do that simply as a matter of like, if you're a big enough company and you try and do that, you will probably, violate civil rights law, right? Because, you're going to be like cutting out some significant portion of the population that isn't going to jive with your very cool, I promise you culture, right? Type of deal, right? Like as opposed to like,
and I think that there's other pieces to it too, which is like the way that the law sort of like overcorrects for some of this stuff. So for instance, I think Blizzard has a sort of sordid past, but part of what I think makes that sordid past so kind of inviting is how much of a juxtaposition it creates. Do you know what I mean? Because Blizzard is a company that is lauded and it's this hit machine, and it's made these games that are foundational and that people have huge, huge attachments to, right? Like the way that people are going to find spouses in World of Warcraft and get married in game, like all that kind of stuff, right? Like it just creates an extra level of sort of like weight to what the company is doing. When you find out that company has a scandal because somebody does a deeply inappropriate thing or whatever, that just matters more than when that kind of thing happens at Procter and Gamble. You know what I mean? Like at Procter and Gamble, I am sure there are plenty of HR complaints that come in, and there are plenty of people who do, terrible, untoward things, and there are plenty of people who are going to get fired because of X, Y, or Z, right? I'm sure there are plenty of other companies out there that have a frat bro, setting somebody's desktop background to pornography when they get up and walk away from their computer type sort of like vibe and culture. But because those companies don't make some of the most important games of your, childhood and lifetime, nobody cares. Nobody gives a fuck. It doesn't become headline news in that same way. And there's something about that I find so interesting and compelling about both of these sort of stories, is like the feeling of cracking open, and seeing stuff that, I don't know, it simultaneously feels normal in the sense that I do think that this stuff happens every day. And I recognize that, I think a lot of companies probably are poor about aspects of this and all of the rest of that, especially in the video game industry, right? But for some reason, I just don't care when it's, I don't know.
Let's not name
Ubisoft.
a real company, right? Like,
oh shit! I just named a real company.
Well, I mean,
whatever.
Ubisoft famously has these problems, right? Like,
well, this is exactly what I'm saying. Ubisoft also has these problems. Lots of people going to court, all of the rest of this, just like tons and tons of these issues, right? But I just don't think anybody cares about the Ubisoft stuff to the level that they care about the Blizzard stuff, because the juxtaposition matters. Because Ubisoft is not Blizzard. It's a big company. It could make some headlines, but if I go and I look at the click-through rates on those Kotaku articles about Ubisoft and the Kotaku articles about Blizzard, the Blizzard one get way more because that juxtaposition exists. That's kind of the point that I make.
And the only thing I'd cool with that is that like some of this stuff is like you don't care right now, but like, you know, maybe in 20 years, right, there will be a Jason Shrier book about, I don't know, what's an about a minor game company making hits right now, you know, like the, you know,
Supergiant or something.
Sure,
right? Like
sure. Or Devolver, right? Like something like that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, sure.
Even though they're a publisher, right? Like, you know, 20 years we'll get a book about all the terrible things that are happening right now that like maybe there's a news article about, but we don't actually care about because they're relatively small beans in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, I definitely think that that's part of it, especially because like there's such like, to go back to your original thing, right? Like I don't think Valve or even Nintendo has the same kind of fans that Blizzard does. Same type of people like I think the companies that kind of fall into that category are like Bungie and maybe Bethesda, right? Although I think Bethesda's moved out of that space. I think they had that at one point.
I think you could have said BioWare, but probably not anymore for BioWare. I think Blizzard might be kind of the only one left of these sorts of...
Bungie,
there definitely would have been...
I think Bungie still has some of it.
Oh, really? Interesting. Okay.
Well, people care. People care about Marathon in a lot of ways that are frankly puzzling, right? Like,
that's true.
Like in both in positive and negative ways. But I would say that Bungie's definitely on the back foot for that kind of thing. Like we were talking earlier about how I think this might have been precast about how like Marvel is maybe in the same spot that Blizzard was in like 2018. I think Bungie might be kind of like, you know, coming out of their nadir, right? Like in the same type of way. And whether or not they survive it is, you know, still up in the air. But you know,
that is also really compelling, because I definitely think it happened with BioWare, right? I probably am the poster child for some of these, right? Before I ever played World of Warcraft to an insane degree, I was playing, you know, Mass Effect. Well, that's not true. I played World of Warcraft before I played Mass Effect, right? And I also played World of War. No, I played Oblivion before I played WoW. I think Oblivion is 2000. No shit, I played WoW before both of these.
Well, just to kind of put like you know, a point on it, Mass Effect and Dragon Age are kind of like the crescendo of BioWare, right? Like they've been this way since, you know, since Baldur's Gate, right? Like, you know, they've been like, they had that kind of thing, and they basically got EA'd out of existence, right? They still kind of exist now, but like they kind of, whereas Blizzard is kind of now rising out of that kind of like pit. I just don't think BioWare ever did or ever will at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting about Bethesda, because I do wonder if they can also similarly rise out of this pit. Because Starfield, you know, didn't really get anywhere. We haven't seen any meaningful updates about Elder Scrolls. Fallout, what's happening with Fallout since
a show?
Fallout 4? Yeah, I mean, it's a show, and I guess Fallout 76 is kind of where those things have sort of gotten.
Starfield is apparently getting a new update in like a week.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
and a second expansion. But, you know, it shows how much that we care about it, that, like, you know, I heard about this on a podcast earlier today, and, you know, and I'm telling you, this is the first you've apparently heard of it, right? So, you know, I think that reinforces the point.
And I do wonder, like, I recognize that I have my own view on this, right? Like, World of Warcraft is really important to me. Starcraft or whatever, and Hearthstone, these are all deeply important to me on a level that I pay attention to the news that is coming out of those. Are there people like that for Bethesda products? Probably, right? But I don't know. I think that the sort of the shine has fallen off of a lot of these companies, which is one of the things I actually think is most compelling about the book in general, about Jason Schreier's book specifically. Jeff Kaplan tells a story that kind of ends with his own departure from Blizzard, which is basically among Bobby Kotick taking deeper and deeper control of Blizzard in the kind of 2010s, kind of starting in 2013, but really ramping up in 2017, 18, 19 kind of thing. And The thing that I think is so ironic about it, the kind of thing that you only actually get out of the book because it's history and it's not a story. It is narrativized nonfiction. Okay. It's not a novel. Is that Bobby Kotick was right about World of Warcraft. They did just need to ship content faster and more. And the team is now doing that, and everybody really likes World of Warcraft, right? Like, they spent all of the 2010s basically saying, well, 9 pregnant women can't make a baby in a month kind of thing, which is I hear this all the time in game development. It's like,
true in software in general. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there was sort of this argument that, you can't make WoW expansions faster than we make WoW expansions. But we are living in a world where we just got an expansion a year and a half after an expansion. And these expansions are pushing more content than ever because the teams are diversified. And there is a structure that Bobby Kotick, like, it's crazy that you're hearing Bobby Kotick recommend this in like 2014 WoW. Yeah, I would kind of say WoW should have gone to this structure sooner. And everybody probably would have been happier without a 16-month content drought between Mr. Pandaria and Warlords of Draenor. Like, yes, obviously, absolutely, he was right about these things. And it's funny because the book is so clear, and I think everyone agrees, myself included, that I just think Bobby Kotick sucks. I think he sucks so bad and is sort of the worst. But I kind of have to give him credit for being right about this foundational thing, about this game that is so...
On the one hand, I want to say I don't think he was totally right because he wanted annualized releases and he basically killed Guitar Hero, right? Like by putting out too much Guitar Hero, right? In the same way that like Bobby Kotick's spiritual brother who lives at Hasbro is slowly killing Magic the Gathering by insisting they release 70,000 sets a year from 42 different universes beyond, right?
Deeply true.
But on the other hand, like I think people want to hate Bobby Kotick because he's an easy villain, right? And that is in part the job of a CEO, right? We were talking, again, go back to this Kathleen Kennedy thing. The point of being this point person is to be the person that the buck stops with, right? Like ultimately, if there's a failure, that is your responsibility as like, the leader of this company. And you should, your part of your job is to own that. But he is very business minded. I think the book highlights some of the ways in which that was bad, right? Like the CTO that they ship into Blizzard, who is like a European, like I think he was like a packaged goods type of like CTO, like very much didn't understand kind of the consumer like the difference between the consumer relation what you have with like your laundry detergent maker versus your art provider, your half art, half kind of recreational sport provider, right? Which is what a video game is, right? It's, combine the Mona Lisa with soccer or something, right? But on the other hand, he basically saves the company from like this is the most incredible part of the book to me, from like this scandal where like this consumer goods company had purchased Blizzard in what at the time was assumed to be kind of like a diversification strategy, but was really just a way to like kind of like cook their books, right? And make their bad business sheets look right by attributing revenue in a way that was very slimy. It ended up costing the employees in Blizzard a lot because they were granted stock in this parent company whose value fell off when they were taken to court by I don't know. I might be mixing up stories, but was like Chris Christie involved in this, or was this somebody else?
This was the one that Chris Christie was involved in.
Yeah, but like this kind of like the whole corporate thing is the most fascinating, or is some of the most fascinating part of it for me because it's something I didn't know and something that I didn't realize. I didn't realize that Blizzard has basically been a subsidiary since it's been Blizzard, right? It was subsidiary to the Mathbuster people who sold it to this, who became its own giant, right? Like the educational software company became its own giant. It sold out to this consumer goods like thing, which The Mathbuster people eventually end up running away from because they realize something's hinky, right? And leave Blizzard out to dry, which eventually gets sold to Vivendi, which I knew because they also owned a large share of Valve at some point. Turns out they're a French water company, like a utility company, who eventually ends up selling it to Bobby Kotick, who's like, yeah, fuck it, we'll buy it, we'll buy out all of this with investors, and we'll run this as a successful company. And he did it, right? He made Activision Blizzard a titan in a lot of ways. And it didn't all have good effect, but he ran a successful company, right? I don't think that's something that we were talking earlier about, how Mike Morhaime is the type of CEO who plays the games and understands the product.
Yeah.
I don't think he runs a business as successfully as Bobby Kotick does. And maybe that's not always a good thing, right? I think Gabe Newell has run Valve in a non-business optimal way, and as a result, Valve has an ironclad reputation and also makes money hand over fist. And a lot of people attribute this to him not bringing the company public. I could believe that. But, I don't know where I land on it, because it's impossible to know the alternative world where, Bobby Kotick never buys Blizzard and they do their own thing for a while. But, I definitely think there's I don't think it's a simple story. I don't think it's really.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's a simple story, but I do think that Bobby Kotick is this ironic kind of villain. He is a villain who has a point, in the sense of he is right about some things, right? And even, annualized releases for WoW expansions, obviously that is not a thing that has happened, but speeding up the content pipeline for WoW games absolutely has, and I think is good for the game, and has made the game, kind of back into the sort of the hit that it ought to have been, right? But also at the same time, I absolutely agree that Bobby Kotick I loved Guitar Hero. He ran Guitar Hero into the ground. He ran Tony Hawk into the ground. And I don't even really think that he understood what, the part about Blizzard that is so compelling is that they just don't miss, right? There's a moment in the book where they're talking about Overwatch, right? Overwatch kind of comes out of Project Titan. Jeff Kaplan gets really into the details of this in the Lex Friedman interview, which is really great, where he talks about the different pitches they had, where he had a couple of weeks reduced to a very small team, and they were just meant to figure out how to ship, make something out of Project Titan that's sort of shippable. And there's a piece in there that I want so bad, which is about the conflict between Rob Pardo, who I don't think comes off very well in the book, even though he kind of owns the golden era of World of Warcraft, right? He is essentially the game director for World of Warcraft for the first 3 years, kind of. Jeff Kaplan also kind of. But there's this part where it talks about how Chris Metzen and Rob Pardo were really fighting all the time about what Project Titan sort of was. And then eventually Rob leaves the company because Project Titan sort of collapses, and Chris Metzen and Jeff Kaplan are able to sort of deliver on the vision, and the vision that Chris Metzen had was for essentially Overwatch, right? This kind of quasi superhero sort of universe. And you're just man, I wonder what that would have looked like without Rob Pardo in sort of the equation. But I think the part of this that is unmistakable in my mind is the way in which Activision, taking the heavier sort of stance, deprived Blizzard of the opportunity to do this thing that they had been doing for quite a long time, right? Hypothetically speaking, but there's a world where Bobby Kotick gets to just kind of say, I don't want Activision. I don't care that Blizzard has wildly fluctuating years where sometimes it makes $1.5 billion and sometimes it makes $250,000, right? What I care about is there is this ironclad trust that people have in this brand because we just let them sort of do their own thing. And I absolutely think that would have been preferable to sort of all of the tumult of the 2018 to, 2022 era of Blizzard.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't know how practical that is, right? Part of the way that works is something where you have Activision, essentially paying the bills and letting Blizzard cook and create hits, type of deal. Or, I mean, in the current iteration, Microsoft, having all of Microsoft, at least during the Phil Spencer tenure, we'll see how things turn out now that Phil Spencer said, yeah.
There's this part of this that I really want to get into, because I think you can make a very good argument that Microsoft is what people say they want, okay, for Blizzard. And not to put anybody on, but this is also the kind of thing that you read news articles about, or like when the Microsoft acquisition was happening, there were all of these anonymous Blizzard employees who were giving quotes to people like Jason Schreier saying, please God, let this merger go through, get Bobby Kotick out of my face, right? Because Microsoft is a very hands-off, they don't super care. It's a rounding error to them. Their business is fucking, whatever, cloud services, and this is just, who cares, kind of. And I think if you look at the studios that Microsoft has, you can't demonstrate success, right? If you look at Bethesda, we just talked about it, right? There's a fall from grace there. There's a fall from grace even for Obsidian, who I think have been doing extremely good work, and I would probably say is excellent. How is that? Are they carrying their weight in sort of the Microsoft brand? Probably not. The Xbox is never profitable. Nobody ever goes for Xboxes compared to PlayStation, like all of these other sorts of things. And I don't know, you wonder where that puts you. You wonder where you end up on the other side of sort of like that equation.
Yeah. I think there's a value to having kind of like, an end of the runway, essentially, to put it back at startup terms, right? Like, I also wonder how much of this is just kind of like modern development cycles are too long, right? Like, like Blizzard faces like, running out of runway a couple of times, but like they're talking in time scales of like, oh, we couldn't get Diablo 2 out for 96 or whatever it was, and it released in 97. And it's like, that's like an incredible, like a development time of like a year is like unheard of for excuse me, games of that scale at this point in time, right? Like, and that's technical reasons, right? But
yeah, there's a part in the interview with Lex Friedman where Jeff Kaplan talks about the crawl, walk, run, and catch the raid, ride the wave. How do you feel about all of that kind of, how do you feel about all of that kind of stuff?
In what way in particular?
I kind of think that he's making an argument, a kind of behind the back argument that, he says the thing, he's like, if Overwatch 2 is the greatest mistake of my career because I would have done it all differently had I known what I know now, right? And the way that Overwatch was framed is they needed to turn Project Titan into something that could make money. They did so by turning it into a PvP shooter. But part of the pitch was that they were going to do crawl, walk, run. They were going to make the PvP shooter, then add the PvP mode, then add an MMO shell that combines all of it. And he was too beholden to that pitch for the purposes of the game. And he sort of describes this era of Overwatch comes out. It's a huge, gigantic mega smash. They do one offhand event that also performs extremely well. And he goes, I want to start working on these events. But he has a bunch of people on his team who say, we all need to start thinking about Overwatch 2. What's your take on that side of things?
I don't know if I have a strong take, because I think they had this weird problem where the fan base was like split. We talked about this at the time, I think, which is that like the people who cared a lot about the story didn't really play Overwatch, right? Like, yeah. And I'm not convinced that a PvE shooter would have pulled them in, right? Because like, it's hard to deliver those kind of story beats, right? Like, in like a shooter in like a way that like makes you care enough to kind of play it that way, right? Like, it's at least in the way that I would have expected them to do it, which is kind of like a mission based, lobby based, kind of Left 4 Dead style PvE thing, which is what they ended up doing. Like, I don't see a world where they create a Half-Life style Overwatch campaign where maybe you're switching characters every level or something. And I don't think you ever would have gotten there starting from this PvP hero shooter. I just don't think that's realistic.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think Jeff seems to think that they should have thrown out all of the rest of it, right, and just focus on, catch the raid, ride the wave, which I think is a fair sort of perspective, and I want to trust, obviously, like, his expertise or whatever. But I look at the backlash to Overwatch 2 when they pulled the PvE, from sort of the experience and kind of announced that it wasn't going to happen, and they released this piddly $15 story pack that nobody bought about and cared, and it got overwhelmingly negative reviews and all the rest of that kind of thing. And I do think that people really wanted that, right? And I don't think that they just wanted that because it was Jeff telling them, hey, this is Overwatch 2, this is what it's going to look like. I mean, frankly, I do think that is a part of it. Obviously, I was at the BlizzCon where they announced it, and I played the PvE shooter mode of the game, and it was super fun. I went back and I played it multiple times because it was so, it really like scratched, kind of that itch. That other PvE shootery experiences, Helldivers, Darktide, right, like any of those kind of did. But also maybe I am wrong. The one piece of this that I think is complicated, right, is how do you reflect across both, right? No other of these PvP shooters, except for Destiny, I think, has a game mode that crosses both sides, right? There's no PvP mode in Darktide. There's no PvP mode in Helldivers, right? You couldn't even make a PvP mode in Helldivers that would really make sense because the whole thing is balanced around kind of this PvE experience, or Payday, or Killing Floor, or Left 4 Dead, or any of these kinds of things. And in a world where you need to nerf Tracer because she's too powerful in PvP, but she's underpowered in PvE, what do you do in that sort of situation? It's kind of like the simplest kind of
you can
distillation
diverge
of that
the characters,
idea.
But like,
yeah.
Like that's kind of what they do.
Now, are you asking somebody to are you asking a player whose Tracer is their favorite character and they want to swap between modes, but they have to memorize, different numbers, different time to kills, different, all of these other things? Is the gun feel going to be different in one and the other because Tracer has higher attack speed and they nerfed her attack speed for PvP, but not for PvE, right? Like all of those kinds of things crop up, and those are sort of like problematic. And I don't know where I fall on sort of any of that. My instinct is to say that I don't think Jeff Kaplan really gave credit to the kind of players, frankly, like me, right, who would have gone apeshit for a PvE mode and want more. I know a lot of Overwatch lore. I learned a lot of it. I think is great, and it's really interesting. And I would love to push it, watch it be pushed forward into the future. They're doing a little bit of that now, but not as much as I would have hoped. And there's just no good way for me to experience that kind of story. But I don't know, maybe I'm just a dying breed of a player.
I think part of this is like, I'm not saying that I think that the dream was wrong. I just think it was unrealistic to expect you to be able to build that out of what Overwatch was. And I don't know. The thing that keeps popping into my head is like the type of game that you have described, which has PvE and PvP elements, and also an interesting story. It's obviously
it's just Destiny.
No, it's Marathon, right? Like, right? Like,
fair enough.
Because like, so the problem that happens with these, with the games that have the modes separate, like Destiny, is that unerringly, one of them, usually the PvP mode, kind of becomes the redheaded stepchild, right? Like, this is how WoW PvP works. This is how Destiny, the Crucible Destiny works, right? Like, everybody forever complains that like no one cares if, they don't pay enough attention to Crucible to like make it meaningful. And it's interesting to see because Overwatch is kind of the inverse of this, right? Like the PvE mode is the anemic redheaded stepchild as opposed to the PvP mode. And I think the only way you can successfully merge them is you actually have them be the same mode, which is like an extraction shooter, right? Like, I'm on my Marathon bullshit right now. So that's the one that appeals to me. It's also probably the most story rich of any of them.
Could you make an Overwatch extraction shooter mode? I don't think so, but it would be really
I think you could do a one of the things that's probably part of the DNA of Marathon is Gambit in Destiny, right? Like I think you could do like a Gambit style thing, right? Like you do see these kinds of things with like like League of Legends or Deadlock or Dota, right? Like they are like there's a significant PvE component to them. Obviously it's not neutral PvE. It's it's kind of like PvE, but the E is like aligned with the other heroes. But I think the only way you actually get these things to work in tandem is to have them be one in the same system. And otherwise I don't think you can do both at the same time in a way that's going to make everybody happy. Because you at some level, if they're separate, you have to have separate amounts of resources given to either of them, and one of them is going to end up being dominant. And it's really hard. Like I think it's really hard to build a game that appeals to both sides of that. That's both sides of that coin, right? Like the reason that like Halo works is because no one cares too much if the Halo campaign is unbalanced, right? Because it's not a living game, right? Like like a standalone campaign for Overwatch, I think would probably work, but I think the problem there you get to is the probably the most famous line from the Jeff Kaplan interview is like, that's not enough recurring revenue, right? Because it's not. It's it's a one-time expenditure by like probably between a fifth and a quarter of your player base, right? And can you justify the resources there? Like, my guess is that single player shooter campaigns are like low profit margin, right? Because there's just like nothing to keep people hooked in.
Yeah, see, the interesting thing, the argument that I would make is that stuff matters for getting people, it's funny, on the indie side, I think about this in terms of, awareness and discoverability. The thing I'm fighting for, right, is discoverability. And because there are so many projects out there, why do I care about this one over any of the other ones, basically, is kind of the question that underwrites all of, like indies or whatever. In the book, there's a moment where they talk about the Hearthstone dungeon run mode where, dungeon run was made and launched as part of Hearthstone, but it wasn't monetized. It didn't do anything to like drive sort of packs. The answer is, who gives a fuck? You know what I mean? Like that would be my answer, right? I'm obviously not Arnim Zola or whatever the fucking supervillain CFO's name is, but like, if you have a reason that there are people who are logging into your game and playing your game every day, that is those are players that are so much easier to translate into packs than nobody else, right? I don't know what goes on the inside of Hearthstone. They obviously did monetize a version of dungeon runs that I played the absolute living fuck out of, right? But it's just like, it's the crazy thing to me is that roguelike deck builders have become such an insane, you look at Slay the Spire 2, 500,000 players, right? You could have had Hearthstone own that whole space as the AAA version of it, essentially. But they weren't able to connect the dots. And it's just a question of why. Like, why couldn't they get there? I don't know.
Yeah.
Does it make good money but not enough money? Maybe.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like a justification of resources type of thing. Like Slay the Spire,
yeah.
I assume, is not a very large team, right? Like,
yep.
And 500,000 copies of a purchase of like a $20 purchase is a lot of fucking money, right? Like, I don't think that math works out as well when it's like not 500,000 players paying for, an Overwatch campaign that takes a lot of people to build, right? Like, and I do think.
The crazy part to me here, though, is that there are so many other good examples of this, right? You do have Darktide, you do have, Vermintide, Darktide, Helldivers. All of these are PvE shooters that are tremendously successful. You think that a Payday 2 version of, a Blizzard game isn't going to play?
So I think that plays. I think it plays with like a battle pass, right? Like, with some sort of. But I don't think that's what the people who want Overwatch story want. I don't think they want a Darktide or Helldivers style thing. I think they want a Halo Combat Evolved style campaign, right? Like, I think you want personal stories about these characters, right? Which you can't. It's hard to kind of do in the standard PvE format because you end up running them like 7 billion times, and whatever minor story beats are contained in there, right? Like like in Helldivers, it's all part of like a meta narrative that is controlled outside of the game, or it's outside of your
right. But Darktide has a narrative. The if you do all of the missions in order, they tell a story from beginning to end. They just launched their new game mode, which is ironically a Helldivers game mode, where you have to beat the ongoing. You have to play that whole campaign end to end in order to access this kind of game mode. But maybe it's just easier because Fat Shark is in Sweden or something, and they are a smaller, more agile team with better overhead compared to a Southern California Giga Giant, right? Whose answer to everything is just hire more people. Like, I definitely think that factors into sort of all of this. But it is a little wild to me that you look at, I don't know, that you're Bobby Kotick and you look at that and you say that's not something that Blizzard could take and turn into an amazing next level, whatever smash hit.
Yeah, I think we're talking past each other a little bit because I don't think you're wrong. I think that basically I think this happened before Helldivers, right? And I think if Helldivers came before that, Bobby Kotick would be like, "You're telling me there's no Overwatch? We could have an Overwatch Helldivers mode? Approved, right?" Like,
yeah.
What I'm saying is I don't think the people who are clamoring for PvE content typically, I don't think they want a Helldivers mode. I think they want like a campaign, like a classic campaign. I think they want the time that Tracer and Winston, saved a bunch of children from Reaper, right? Or something like that, right? Like, or the time that Soldier 76, did some superhero bullshit, right? Or the campaign to recover Widowmaker from the clutches of the bad people that turned her purple, right? Like that kind of thing. I think that's what, I think that and advancing that narrative is what the people who enjoy the Overwatch story enjoyers, I think that's what they want. And I don't think that was theoretically what they were getting. What was that?
Somebody joining the podcast channel, obviously. I have no idea who.
Yeah. Interesting.
I don't know. I'm trying to think what else. What else happened in these that you think are as like interesting?
Like I said, the biggest stuff to me was the corporate stuff. I had heard about the frat bro culture stuff. I had not realized how kind of depraved it was.
Yeah.
Like the story about the story that was that sticks in my mind is some senior developer and Chris Metzen get into a fist fight and end up breaking through walls in the office. And they only don't get fired because you can't fucking fire Chris Metzen, right? Which is kind of you have to have a certain kind of culture to get there, and that was probably super fun, but it was also probably super, had a lot of downside.
Yeah, the part of the two guys come back from a strip club. They're both super drunk. They vomit into a bathtub that gets clogged and then pass out while the bathtub is running, and it floods the whole or the hotel or whatever. And you're just like, oh my God, how did, I can't imagine how much lower on the totem pole the badness of that had to be in order for me to fire somebody. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't have to flood the hotel in order for me to want to fire you if you are my employee who does that. You know what I mean? But also I do want to fire, I would want to fire that person so bad, basically.
Yeah. It's, I think just kind of part of it is well, he's your friend, right? And you know him personally, right? Like, and he's your buddy. Oh, he likes to have a drink every once in a while, right? Like, and like the roommate was like, that was hilarious, right, guys? Right? Like, that we got thrown out of the hotel because we flooded it or whatever. Like, it's that was kind of the most, like, because like I said, I have been in startup drinking culture. I have never experienced anything quite like that. Yeah. In the chat, Lou says it's kind of an indies versus corporate mindset. Indie is about taking risk for fun things. Corporate life focuses on what's going to make the most money, which tends to avoid risk. It's easy to say that Hearthstone could have had a Slay the Spire-esque mode, but there wasn't proof of that concept being successful yet, making less appealing to the overlords. I think that is definitely true. I also think, I hate to put it this way, but some of this is also like saving people from themselves, right? Because the buck does stop higher, right? Like, imagine that you build, like, we know that Slay the Spire sells gangbusters, right? And it's very popular. Imagine, for whatever reason, they don't hit this magic formula and it doesn't, right? You know what happens? Those people dissolve whatever company makes Slay the Spire, and they go back and they probably, like, go do web development for, like another company, right? Like, and we don't hear of them again, right? The difference is you can't realistically be like, okay, I'm going to build Slay the Spire in Hearthstone, right? Build that, and if it fails, just fire that whole team. You could, but one, that's a lot of bad press. Two, like, the person who is responsible for that, who will also theoretically get fired along with these people that get fired for it, is higher up the chain and is concerned about, is his job is to make sure that the business numbers make sense, right? And him not stopping that is like, is him being bad at his job, right? Like,
yeah, there is also a piece of this that I do want to say is about the personalities, kind of behind the scenes on this stuff. So, for instance, it's easy to say Hearthstone could have had a Slay the Spire-esque mode, but there wasn't proof of that concept being successful yet. I do think that there was proof of that concept being successful, and they did lean into, sort of like dungeon run as a game mode, right? They made dungeon run, and then they doubled down on it the year afterwards, and then they made a monetized version of it the year afterwards itself, which then came out in the same year as Slay the Spire. So in the third year of them pushing dungeon run content, Slay the Spire comes out, right? But a key thing happens. The designer who is making the dungeon run game mode is a guy named Peter Whalen, and Peter Whalen transfers out of Hearthstone to go work on another project at Blizzard. And all of a sudden, the dungeon run stuff is gone. It kind of expires. And it's because Peter Whalen is the guy who was driving this, right? He was the guy who said, I want to make this thing, I want to make this thing happen. It is core to my whatever, and I think it's cool and neat. And now all of a sudden you don't have that person on the team. And there's nobody sort of pushing for it. I don't want to say that that's what happened, because obviously I don't know. This is me sort of like speculating, right? But there is a clear evidence to me of that happening at Blizzard sort of all the time, right? When you watch people leave and, people shuffle around in the company, priorities do change when both Jeff Kaplan is talking about it and when Jason Shrier is going over these sorts of changes in the book. And I want to put some real sort of emphasis, I guess, there, which represents like, yeah, I think there are corporate overlords who are kind of stamping no on things. That's definitely true and definitely very fair. But I also think that there are people from the bottom who are pushing for things, and those people filter out, right? The book makes a pretty big deal of the way that Riot poached a ton of Blizzard people. Frankly, Riot poached a ton of everybody, right? There were a lot of my friends who worked on Final Fantasy who got poached by Riot. Basically, everybody I knew had this kind of Riot problem of everybody was getting poached by Riot all the time. When I was living in like the Southern California game scene, and I was a very, very small, I was a super small rung on that ladder, right? Like, and I feel like that makes a real, that has a real effect on these sorts of things. And by the way, it's exactly what happened to Peter Whalen, because he is now the game director on Teamfight Tactics. which is funny because it's actually the second game director that Riot poached out of the Hearthstone scene itself, because the game director after Ben Brode is a guy named Ishtar. Ishtar got poached to run the League of Legends team after he replaced another guy who got poached out of the World of Warcraft team named Greg Street, Ghostcrawler, who we would all know as getting poached out from World of Warcraft to go run League of Legends. And it's just like, I definitely think that there is that real, you can see it. You can just see people sort of shuffling around. And as those shuffles happen, priorities for the projects themselves change.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely fair, right? Like if, the lead dev on Slay the Spire got poached by Riot, there just wouldn't be a Slay the Spire 2, right? Like there's not, we wouldn't be talking about, like the failure of it, because it's not like it's not like it existed in an ecosystem that, where its absence would be missed, right? Like because Hearthstone is a larger ecosystem than Slay the Spire is, frankly.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, and I actually think this is happening for both WoW and in a weird way happened for Hearthstone. Getting rid of the old guard, I actually do think made a positive change to the landscape and ecosystem of the game. I have a lot of love for kind of the ancient era of World of Warcraft. Obviously, a lot of people do. Classic is popular and everything like that. But when I look at World of Warcraft post Legion, right, which is really where everybody has sort of fallen off the back of the bandwagon, right? Even people who weren't part of the original sort of crew, like Ghostcrawler, were gone, and you sort of have this Ian Hazzikostas era that has lasted us for 10 years or so, sort of at this point. I think part of the reason that Legion was so successful and upgraded the game in so many ways is actually because you get rid of guys like, the Rob Pardos and the Jeff Kaplans of the world who move off of that project to go do other stuff and to sort of upgrade the base experience of the game in new and exciting ways, right? So thinking about world questing, right? The kind of expansion event game activities, Mythic Plus, even stuff like Delves that just came out of last expansion, right? Like those are the kinds of experiences that really do sort of set like World of Warcraft apart. And it's funny because I think the same thing happened with Hearthstone. I actually don't think Ben Brode was a very good game director for Hearthstone. This is an extremely controversial opinion. I don't think Ben Brode was a very good game director for Hearthstone. It was extremely successful at that time, but actually the game was much worse in those days, and its approach to a number of things, most importantly balance, was quite poor in Ben Brode's time. And it was because Ben Brode didn't want to make certain changes. Like he wanted the game to work in the way that he wanted the game to work, basically, right? And getting rid of Ben Brode as your game director let people revisit those bad decisions and make better decisions. And Hearthstone was a better game for a while after Ben Brode sort of had passed the torch. I don't know. Yeah, that's my, there you go. That's my Hearthstone speech. As a longtime avid Hearthstone player, okay, 2020, 2021 were like the best years of Hearthstone.
Yeah. Yep. Fair enough.
But also, like, last year was like the worst year of Hearthstone, so rip.
I haven't played Hearthstone in a while. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I've got anything else about either of them in particular.
There's one piece that I wanted to mention. So many of these guys fell out of the back of Blizzard, and we kind of haven't heard from them since. What does that tell you? So, for instance, Dustin Browder, right, the game director on Starcraft II, he opened up a indie studio that I don't think has made anything, right? Mike Morhaime made Dreamhaven, which is essentially a publisher for indie games, which I think got a lot of press at the time, but to my knowledge, Dreamhaven hasn't made anything that made a real sort of impact on stuff. I don't even really. I just think a lot of these guys move on, and then they kind of don't. Nothing They don't strike lightning twice.
Yeah, I think part of it is just like it's hard to strike lightning twice, right? Like,
Yeah.
There's the assumption that, like, I think there's a lot of people that assume that it's something that there's a lot less luck and a lot more them involved, right? And I just don't think that that's true. I also think it's hard to. I think when you can afford, when you can afford to spend a lot of time on a game, even if, you're under pressure from like corporate people, you still get more time. You still get more time to develop a game at Blizzard than you do if you are actually on a runway, right? With like, limited funds, right? Like I believe, Ghostcrawler created a studio that just kind of like fell apart that was developing an MMO, right?
Yeah. He left Blizzard to go do, oh God, now I want to like figure this out. He left Blizzard to go to Riot. Okay. Then he left to go make a new indie funded MMO in 2023.
And I think that just fell apart because I think someone that we both know that went to college with us was part of, like, left Blizzard to go join Ghostcrawler's MMO, and that like fell apart at the end of last year.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah. I remember looking this up at some point. And, I think an indie MMO is just like never going to be a thing that works, right? Like, it's just, you can't, right? Like, it requires too much institutional support for like a truly MMO experience to work. So you need to be like, you have to be at a big company. Like I think Sony or EA or something could theoretically pull it off, but I just don't think you can have like, an upstart MMO, right? Like I think Ashes of Creation or whatever, remnant of any of these, ironically, the only one that maybe will work is Star Citizen or whatever, and that still seems like it's never going to be fully done. But
this is such an interesting question because it does work sometimes, and I can't. But like you can't. Like Final Fantasy 14 worked,
but right? Final Fantasy 14 is not an indie MMO, right? Like Square Enix is the opposite of like an indie.
So I'm even drawing a bigger circle than this. I'm just thinking about MMOs in general, right? Final Fantasy 14 worked, and like propped up the entirety of Square Enix for like however many years because they were
Final
able
Fantasy
to.
It needed a second attempt, right? Like
that's fair, but also New World completely floundered, fell flat on his face, sure. Right? The most powerful company in the world at the time made that game, and they poached. They had real talent behind it. A ton of WoW people, a ton of Blizzard people went to go work on that game. Where is it? Yep. It's vaporware. I don't know. There's this is just the part that I think is that is really hard, and this is the part that's in my the DNA of my my job right now, right? Like there is no good way to look at a vertical slice and a pitch deck and go, this thing is going to make $1 billion. Just nobody knows the real answer to that question. It's all about taking bets. Like, can it? Maybe, sure. But Bobby Kotick didn't understand what he had on his hands with Tony Hawk and Guitar Hero, and only invested in them when they popped off and made insane amounts of, became insanely successful, right? Even Blizzard fucked it up with Heroes of the Storm, right? Which is a game that I love and I think is better than, frankly, League of Legends, which is a game that I deeply dislike at this point, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I think part of it is I think part of it is that you can't tell what's going to make $1 billion, and the moat between there's no such thing as a base hit MMO, right? you can have like a game that does okay, right? That makes back its costs and like, makes you like, some marginal amount of profit on top of it. And that's like fine and self-sustaining relatively, right? Like I'm sure you know this better than I do, right?
Yeah.
You really can't do that with an MMO. And I think another part of the mix here is that like there are nebulous network effects that determine the success of a socially driven game that are like at best loosely correlated with the actual quality of the gameplay. And I think that's just like ultimately the problem, right? Like, you could not convince me that if you released, World of Warhammer, and it is mechanically and functionally identical to World of Warcraft, right? Like retail World of Warcraft right now, if that game would be successful, because I don't know if you convince enough people to start playing it. Right, like some of that's just like aesthetics, and maybe Warhammer would be able to do it because Warhammer 40K is like
they tried it. Warhammer Age of Reckoning.
Sure,
and they didn't get there. The funny thing to me about Warhammer that I think is really complicated and interesting is the Warhammer IP. Like it is its own searchable. I think it's the only thing like this on Steam. There's so many games inside of the Warhammer IP that it is a genre tag on Steam. You can go to Steam and you can type in Warhammer and you will get 50, 100 games. And some of these go nowhere. They are absolutely worthless. They are dog shit. But like some of them are gangbusters where Vermintide, Darktide, right? Like I can just say those names and the games, or Total War Warhammer 3, right? Like I can say those names and people just get it because those games are huge and became huge, but so many of these others completely fell by the wayside, right? And even that, I think, describes to me this sort of folly that, like, there just aren't. There are some hits and there are some flops, and you can't bank on any of them, so you just kind of have to try and refine it, which is what makes it so interesting to me that Blizzard is such a hit machine, right? Outside of maybe Nintendo, and even Nintendo I don't even know, I just don't pay a lot of attention to, but I probably would say that people think Nintendo has a pretty insane hit rate, right? Outside of Nintendo, I don't think that there's any video game company on the planet that has the same kind of hit rate that the Blizzard team does. Maybe just Heroes of the Storm is sort of a low point for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that is, self, like just kind of like brand, right? Like, yeah, I mean, theoretically, CD Projekt Red, right? Like the only failure there is Gwent as a standalone product, right?
Yeah.
But they burned a lot of trust with Cyberpunk, right? They had to build it like they had to build it into something good in order to regain that trust, right? And I think Blizzard, as we're talking about, as recently as like 2018, was in a pit, and they managed to pull themselves out of it because they were able to rebuild trust with Diablo 4 and the newer WoW expansions. I think part of that is just that like you've got enough of a captive audience with WoW that like you've got a long trust runway where like people will keep playing it, and you will be able to build back into that kind of like things are good again land.
One of the interesting things I think is there was this moment where I think it was Cliff Bleszinski was quoted in Jason Schreier's book, because Cliff Bleszinski was working on Lawbreakers when the Overwatch trailer dropped and got 500 million views on YouTube or whatever it was. And in Cliff Bleszinski's book, he quotes somebody on his team saying, "We're so fucked," right? That's the feeling I feel like that kind of like underwrites this. There are a lot of games out there that just can't get traction. They just cannot connect. And even Overwatch, which is a game that has been through some deep nadirs, at the same time, at least it has brand recognition. People recognize Tracer or Reinhardt or Torbjorn or whomever. and they don't recognize anybody from fucking Battleborn, right?
My favorite part, one of my favorite parts of the book was definitely when I don't know if I know that you didn't finish the book, but they're basically pitching Overwatch to Bobby Kotick, and they like show him the characters. He's like, these characters are so unique and great. I love this, right? Like, and it's like, look at Torbjorn. He's so unique. And apparently, all the nerds are like, "What are you fucking talking about?" Right? Like, he's like the most generic dwarf ass looking motherfucker.
He's a Warcraft dwarf. Yeah, the part that I really love about that, the part that I really connect to about that, it's like the way that those characters really get in people's brains. This is something I fucking hate League of Legends. I think League of Legends is honestly the word I want to go for with League of Legends is sort of soulless. The thing that I have respect for, Riot is such a good counterexample to this. The thing that I have respect for about Blizzard and with Blizzard is Blizzard was built by these game designers and developers, right? And truly run by them even into the modern, like the modern age, this modern era that we are in. Even when Mike Morhaime resigns, J. Allen Brack takes over. He was the game director, or he's like the executive producer or whatever. It's the top level job. He was the EP on Warcraft, and this was a real guy who was in the thick of it, right? I don't particularly I can't remember what this guy's name is. He was Quick, QWIK. I don't particularly like that guy. I can't remember what his name was, but he took over after J. Allen Brack. That guy was also a real game, he was touching the game kind of game player, right? You could look up his character on like the World of Warcraft Armory and see that he was clearing high-end Mythic Plus keys because he was a good player of the game. He was sort of like touching the game. I don't think Mark Merrill or Brandon Peck or whatever the fuck their names are, I don't think that they have touched League of Legends competitively. I don't think they care. I don't think they have the same sort of like drive there. I think of them as just kind of empty sort of suits. And I think of the stuff that animates Riot, even as Riot has good people who do good work. I do want to be clear about that. I had lots of people who worked on my teams that went to Riot because Riot paid more than everybody else. Those people are great and smart and all of the rest of it, but I just think that, I don't know, I find League of Legends soulless. And Overwatch is really the opposite of that. Even for a game that I liked it. I mean, I played a lot of it. I played a lot of Overwatch 2 even, right? That game had a lot of soul to it. And I think that I don't know, all of that's important.
I don't know.
Frankly, I think all of that's Chris Metzen, to be real with you. Like this was only I obviously had quite a lot of respect for Chris Metzen, but all of this only made my respect even higher. Like the way that Jeff Kaplan was talking about, Chris dictating sort of like these story notes to them or whatever. I don't know. It's real. It matters a lot to me. Lou wants to fight me in the chat. She says, that sounds like some subjective bullshit. I mean, yeah, I guess. I don't know. It's my podcast, so I can say what I want.
I'm going to say that I don't think Soul's important. Like,
really?
I think League of Legends is a successful game because it is like pure competition, right? It is pure games of sport, right? Like this and Rocket League and like most fighting games are pure games of sport. And I think that there is an attraction to that. And I think that that's fine, right? Like, I don't think that I don't think that baseball has soul in the mechanics of the game, right? Like, I don't think if you like make a baseball game with fake players, right? Like you used to get on like the Game Boy, right? With like, like John Smith is the first baseman. That game is going to be soulless because the mechanics of baseball, has a soul to it. I think like the game had like the ecosystem of the MLB has a soul to it because it's got real people playing it. In the same way that I think that some aspect of League of Legends has soul to it because, the players have stories that you care about, right? What is Jimmy talking about in the chat?
Jimmy says it's also a function of friend slop / friendship, which I would agree with, right? You know, this is also fundamentally true.
Yeah.
The number one reason that people quit games, live service games, is because their friends quit, right? Like they were playing the games that their friends play. And the number one reason that somebody picks up a game is because their friends, you know, like pick it up and play it. I absolutely think that is 1000% like a real sort of phenomenon. But yeah, it's very strong words about the soullessness of League. I don't know. I really fucking hate that game, you guys. Part of it, and you know, like part of this, I guess I will just like own my bias a little bit. Like I know people who, I don't know. I just like it is always going to be hard for me to separate kind of the personal, because I understand. I know people who worked on those teams and made those kinds of decisions. But when I play or experience stuff that's going on in like the current era of World of Warcraft, right? Like there is a level of care on a narrative sort of art level that I think connects. I'm mildly willing to kind of concede on the games as sport level. Like I think you could get me on board. Baseball is the wildest answer, by the way. Baseball has tons of soul.
No.
Right?
Baseball,
but the soul is all the content.
Yeah, baseball, the game does not have soul, right? Like the players and like the sport has soul, right? That's the type of distinction I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. But I don't even think, I don't know, do you think League of Legends is such a transcendently well-crafted game experience? Like the actual just raw gameplay mechanics itself are so whatever, that this is the core foundation of sort of its success?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think it invented it, right? Like Dota invented it, right? Like, but
sure.
I think the kind of, it's basically a competitive, it's a game that has competitive expression. I think it's the one that happened to cap, like that and Dota 2 are the ones that captured the MOBA competitive expression area, right? But I think it's also hard to make these like purely competitive games, right? Like to have a lot of soul, right? Like I don't think Call of Duty multiplayer has soul. I think you can.
Yeah, I would also describe Call of Duty as soulless, so that's fair.
I think the campaign, some of the campaigns have moments that like have emotional things that hit, right? But like I haven't played a Call of Duty campaign ever, I don't think.
Oh, you never played the Modern Warfare 1?
No.
Where you start that one is actually, I also think of this as soulless for the record, but you know, it was a compelling story, right? You know, Soap or whomever is, I don't know, where the fuck is Caroline, right? She cares about Call of Duty story.
but she doesn't get her like lore from the multiplayer, right? Like, you know, she doesn't write slash fic about Nicki Minaj and Homelander, right? In the context of Call of Duty, right? It's about the characters that get characterized through the campaign.
Yeah, I also think there's a part of me that would make an argument, and I'm so sorry, like, to do this to your wife in her absence, but like I would probably make some level of argument that like people can also just like trash, right?
Oh, sure.
Like I don't think Call of Duty's story is very good in those characters necessarily. I don't think
so. I don't think something that has soul, like I don't think that soul and trash are mutually exclusive, right? Like,
oh, interesting. I guess you're right. Like, yeah, I guess I actually, I would think like.
I think, you know, what's the fucking room guy's name? Tommy or whatever? Like, I think
Tommy Wiseau?
Yeah, I think Tommy Wiseau poured his soul into the room. I think he created a pile of trash, but I think that movie has soul, right? Like,
yeah, I know. Jimmy's in the chat, and I was about to make a Wachowski sisters reference, which is to say that I think the Wachowski sisters put a ton of soul into The Matrix, put a ton of soul into Jupiter Ascending, and a ton of soul into Speed Racer. And I'm going to be real, those movies, not all bangers, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, the only good story Riot ever made was Arcane. The game itself keeps trying, but it's rudimentary and so detached from the gameplay that it's useless. Yeah, I have never watched Arcane. My antipathy to League of Legends is so hard that I understand that Arcane is good. Everybody says Arcane is good, and I'm sure it is, or whatever. I'm not making a claim on it. I just, like, I can't care. You can't get, like... I'm so sort of mad at League of Legends that I will just not watch Arcane because it...
You're just like soul scarred by it, and you like will never never
Yeah.
like.
Soul Scarred is a great answer. It's sort of like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something that fills me with this level of antipathy. Maybe like the Russo brothers. Like I don't think I ever want to watch a Russo brothers film ever again, except for I guess I don't know. They're doing the next Avengers. I'll probably see that or whatever. It's like I hate them. I think that they are bad. I don't think they are good, capable filmmakers, and I'm just fundamentally uninterested in anything that they ever touch again. And that's a little bit of how I feel about League of Legends stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I feel that way about anything really. Like I don't think there's a thing that you could tell me that I don't think there's anything where if you told me it was good and I had the time, like I have not watched Arcane, but that's not because I have foreclosed the possibility of watching Arcane. It's just because I have other things I'd rather watch.
I don't know that I could frame it's sort of just maybe I'm just like a deeply passionate person or something. Like obviously my love for Fast and Furious and Zack Snyder and Denis Villeneuve, right? Like you have all of that stuff on one end, right? My love of the Dune 3 trailer as my favorite movie of 2026, just the trailer, right? Is like counterbalanced on the other end by this level of antipathy that I have kind of almost uniquely for League of Legends, right? Like
All right. Well, we're way over time. I think
we're way over time. Yeah.
I don't
know. Do you want to talk about what else? What else happened? What happened in our weeks? You want to talk about marathon stuff?
I played Marathon. Yeah. I played Cryo Archive. I have not played the ranked mode yet. Cryo Archive is crazy. It is very cool. I don't think I'm ever going to finish it because finishing it involves like solving all of the vaults and killing a boss in like this 25-minute window. Which is like, and it's like raid level mechanics. Like the way everybody puts it is it's like raid level mechanics, except there are 4 other teams of people trying to kill you while you do it.
That is awesome, honestly.
Oh yeah,
well played, Marathon. How do you feel about the Marathon discourse that's happening right now?
Like what
are you paying any attention to this?
I know there are people who are like invested in hating it, which I don't understand, but.
The thing that I saw, and frankly, obviously, you are going to know immediately where I stand when I describe this. The thing that I saw is Mark Kern tweeted a peak concurrence on Marathon at about 50,000 and peak concurrence on Slay the Spire at 500,000, and basically was like, "Oh, AAA is so it's so terrible." Obviously, you know exactly where I stand based on that description of events, but I was just interested if you had paid any attention to this at all.
The peak concurrence thing has been like a specific kind of thing just because it is a live service game that requires a certain number of people. And
I also think people don't understand the number. You need, in order to have a functioning matchmaking structure, you need about 100 people. And honestly, even that is a little bit generous. Like, I don't think people truly understand that, like, you don't need 50,000 people logged in in order to have a functioning matchmaking structure. You need 2 orders of magnitude down in order to have something that's fundamentally pretty playable. And, I mean, I don't know. The numbers are obviously different from Marathon compared to other stuff, right? I happen to know all of this because I've been doing research on it like lately or whatever, but it is truly wild that you don't actually need very many people at all in order to build a sufficiently powerful matchmaking engine for your title.
The concern from my end is not whether or not you have functional matchmaking. It's whether or not, Sony will let Bungie keep doing it, right? This is a very business numbers problem, right? Like, is 50,000 concurrence enough for Sony to be like, okay, Bungie, keep doing this for like the next 2-3 years type of deal? Which I like it very much, but it is a very polarizing game in like just in its gameplay, like for like very legitimate reasons, right? Like extraction shooters were always going to be a niche, and it's a very kind of unforgiving game. Right, like there's no safe pocket. I like this kind of rhythm where it's like during the week, do regular runs and build up your gear. Then on the weekends, jump into Cryo Archive, and where like the ante is 5,000 gear score minimum, and and lose it all. That way you can during the week build it up again for cryo archive runs. Right? Like, I think that's a neat rhythm. The ranked is also weekend only type stuff. So my biggest problem is that the only person I'm consistently playing with is Monic, and I feel like you do need I would ideally 4 other people to ad hoc form teams with to play give real runs where everybody's coordinating you. I can trust that people are going to try, right?
Yeah, it is ironic that World of Warcraft's Midnight dropped and just kind of like a brick on our whole friend group of playing games. Listen, maybe if Marathon came out in November of last year when it was supposed to
come out in
playing
September
together. Yeah.
But yeah. But
how do you feel about the Arc Raiders stuff? There's a lot of people who have been doing the Arc Raiders Marathon comparison. My understanding is that Arc Raiders is still more popular than Marathon. It has, it has sort of held its player base, but I am not super deep in these kind of weeds. I have just only seen conversations on Reddit and stuff about it.
Yeah, my understanding is that is that Arc Raiders has been falling down, which it has been. It's still at 158 concurrents, right? It's just kind of burned itself out, which is essentially what happened to me, right? I played through I played the first season hardcore, I played the second season, and I was I realized I was probably near the end of the runway very early into season 2, and I was actually thinking about this. I played Arc Raiders longer than I probably would have because of the trial system, which I also don't think is very good, but it kind of got its claws in me in the kind of, I need to do my WoW chores type of thing, right? I need to do my weekly trials. But at some point, I just don't care, and that's why I eventually fell off of it. In contrast, I really like Marathon, but I don't feel the same compulsion to I really like Marathon, but there isn't the same type of long-term projects in Marathon that they have in Arc Raiders. That is just kind of I will keep doing runs until I have 7 gizmos to finish the next step in my project, or do the next bit.
It's kind of lizard brain that that impulse. I think this is a very Bobby Kotick sort of thing that I in a weird way kind of resent about myself, that I'm so motivated by some of these lizard brain things, but I deeply am. But also at the same time, maybe one of the things I would say about games that I think have soul and games that don't, or just games that are whatever. Soul is sort of the wrong sort of term for this. I don't think I'm ever going to go back to Arc Raiders. At a certain point, I liked Arc Raiders. I had a lot of fun with it. I played for a respectable amount of time. Right, I'm not, I'm not dissatisfied with it. But I don't really think I'm ever going to touch it again. But I was thinking about this because I made a reference to Starcraft. And Rachel and I were driving home from dinner one night on a 10 or 15 minute drive. And I made a reference actually about her D&D character who has a Southern accent. And I sort of said, oh, Buckley ought to play this twanging sort of steel guitar like in the Starcraft II soundtrack. And I played some of the Starcraft II soundtrack, and it just immediately put me in this place of, oh my God. And I downloaded Starcraft II, and I've been playing not a ton of Starcraft II. Mostly I've been playing World of Warcraft, but I had this one run, this one night with this guy whose name was Ilar77 or whatever on BattleNet, where we played a co-op mission, and after the mission he invited me to a party, and we probably did 6 or 7 more runs until 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was just oh, that feels so good. I fucking love this game. And I've been touching it a little bit here and there, but I'm sure I'm going to put Starcraft II back down imminently, right? It's not like I'm going to be deep in this game. I avoided the thing that I typically do, which is go replay the entire campaign of all 3 games, right? But I don't think that I'm just never going to touch Arc Raiders ever again like that. And in a way, that's a little bit of the difference.
Yeah. No, that's definitely fair. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I also dipped my toes into Crimson Desert. I don't know if like it is like the most kind of divided game I've seen in a while, where it's like some people are like, this is like the craziest thing ever. And some people are like, this is a pile of junk, right? Like, and it's confused because it's trying to do too much. I think it's notable in that kind of way. Like the two people I actively listened to in kind of this space that had opinions on it are Ty Guy Travis, who did the review for IGN, which gave it a 6, and Paul Tassi, who does Forbes stuff and gave it a 9.5.
What was I've seen a lot of the negative. I haven't seen too much of the positive. What is Paul Tassi's argument?
That it is like that. Yeah, the story is bad, but the systems are so incredible and it's so vast that it's worth it anyway. Right. Okay.
Yeah, I have seen a lot. I actually think we're in a bit of a sort of like contraction space. I actually think Starfield is also a pretty good example of this, of like, for a long time, the core prospect for a lot of games was just bigger is better. Do more stuff, more numbers you can put on a poster, thousands of quests, tens of thousands of quests, hundreds of thousands of quests. And at a certain point, you just hit a diminishing return on that. And you get to this point where you just need something that is smaller and more focused, and to kind of contract it back down, which I do empathize with, right? Like, obviously I ran into a ton of tech issues with Avowed, but I actually really like Avowed because it was a streamlined, really straightforward experience, for the amount of time that, that I played it, which was like one sort of single evening. And it wasn't like, it wasn't trying to sell me on, this is 6 times bigger than the map of Skyrim. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that sells me on games anymore. And that's kind of what I felt like Crimson Desert has, but
no, that is absolutely, what's it called? That is absolutely correct. Give me 1 second. That is absolutely correct, but I also think that can be kind of the draw, right? Like I am playing Skyrim, right? And like, I'm just kind of wandering around this world doing random things, and that is entertainment enough. And I definitely got a little bit of that, right? Just kind of like they're kind of like, oh, I have landed here. I'm going to, and I see something off in this, I'm going to go do that instead of, what I'm supposed to be doing. I definitely got a bunch of that. There's just like, that apparently there's not a lot of connective tissue and it gets kind of repetitive at some point, but
Yeah. I'm always willing to, I don't know. Honestly, I think if I was going to play a game like this, it would be Avowed. I would just go back to Avowed before I hit Crimson Desert. Part of this is that I'm always very skeptical of because Crimson Desert, this is a Kickstarter game, right? Or
no, Crimson Desert is do you know have you heard of Black Desert?
Which is Black Desert Online. Okay.
Yeah. It is basically, it's the same devs, and it's kind of like a single player version of that.
Okay, that's interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it is a neat game, but and I think it is interesting because it is so wild, right? It is so big. It has so many systems. I think I appreciate it for that, but we'll see. We'll see how much time I actually end up spending on it. The majority of my gaming time this weekend was Marathon, followed by Slay the Spire. And Slay the Spire is deceptive to me because it is like kind of like I need a break. I'll go like do a Slay the Spire run, but a Slay the Spire run is actually super long, and
it's been happening to me with Muntabi because I've actually been doing a lot of Muntabi testing in my free time. Mostly because I'm really good at it. And I keep taking videos. I did this thing where I took they just hit beta, so this is why we're like testing the beta milestone or whatever. And I am playing on very high difficulties and finding extremely cool lethal scenarios. Basically, I got to this one point where if I ended my turn, I lost. But if I stacked my deck in the correct sort of way and order, I could continue to draw 0-cost cards and cycle my 0-cost cards, even though they only did 6 damage a piece, and I had to do like hundreds of damage, right? And it was the kind of thing, it took me 17 minutes, which I know because I filmed the whole thing. It took me 17 minutes, but then when I took that video and I posted it, to everybody at work, and I was like, guys, look at this sweet lethal that I was able to pull off on the second to last difficulty or whatever. And I was just like, anyway, that game definitely has its hooks in me. It feels a lot like when I was playing Estrella, which was the last one of these to really just completely own me, and that was 2 years ago. So
yeah, no, Slay the Spire. I have finished the base difficulty with all of the characters, and my guess is I'm going to put it aside until release because there's a lot of placeholder art and stuff, and I kind of will probably just wait till release to actually dig back into it and maybe try and climb the Ascension levels. Although, as for last episode, I find climbing the Ascension levels to not be super compelling in the general case.
Yeah, I also imagine that we'll end up doing. I would like to try the co-op mode at some point. I think that would be sweet. But obviously, I don't know when are we gonna have the time because we have PAX coming up and all the rest of it. I guess we played some Magic obviously over the weekend 2 days ago. I don't know. Do you have big thoughts about our Magic playing?
Every time I play my older decks, I want to refine them. Right? Like I think. I think both Augustin and AC need some love. Although I think I got a bunch of AC cards in the proxy order that you have.
I definitely feel that. I am a little wary of Commander games getting too sort of short. I really wanted to play more of that Takesha game, but boy, just killing. You know what? I just want to say, good move, Frank. Killing Takesha completely blew my whole game into smithereens. And you know what the worst part is? I had the mana. I could have defended Takesha if I wanted to. I had a thing that in my hand that would have given her hexproof, but I chose to tap out and play ramp instead of leave up mana to protect my all important engine. Deep mistake, players. Don't be me. Okay.
Yeah. No, it's I think as we continue to play and refine, right? Like, although I did get, I got what I wanted out of Augustin, which was, people being like, I guess I pass, right? And Josh endlessly, it's like, I can't because it costs one more, right? Like,
and the Ristic study was brutal. That was a wild inclusion. It's funny. I've thought a lot about Ristic study. Like I've told myself I'm never going to proxy something like Ristic study, basically, right? Like, but if I do ever rip a Ristic, like what deck is it going to go into? I've thought about that question. I've thought about that question so much because it's like it's got to go. It'll probably end up in Takesha, I think, because I think Eureka draws enough natively, and that I would not want to spend turn 3. I want to spend turn 3 ninjaing something in. I don't want to spend turn 3 dropping a draw engine and passing, right? But Takesha, I could definitely spend that turn putting a draw engine down, kind of thing. But it was so wild to see a Ristic study in our crew because we just have never, we've never interacted with one before.
I was like a turn away from dropping I think it's called like Clever Impersonator. It's like enters the battlefield as a copy of any permanent. I was considering dropping it and being like, it's another Ristic study, right? Like,
yeah. I thought you were going to copy Augustin. I don't know if it. Yeah, okay. Because I know there are certain clones that will let you get away with the legend rule, like Spark Double or whatever else. And it's like, God, could you imagine a 2-mana tags on fucking Augustin? That'd be so brutal. That'd be so mean.
Yeah, and like a 2-mana discount on any of my spells, right? Like that's the thing that like makes it so crazy, right? Is no, oh man, that was a satisfying game. Even though
I'm very excited to report in on what happens after PAX, because there's obviously a lot of Commander to be had. A lot of us are going to be pulling new decks. You, me, and Josh all have new decks. Monica's going to be playing. I built him a custom deck for, just so that he has a thing to play. I want to do a Commander draft. I want to find a good time over the weekend where we can just kind of like dedicate ourselves on like Friday or Saturday night. I was thinking maybe Friday night with the boys while the girls are all going to ballet. Like we could do a Commander draft or something like that, right? Like I'm sure we'll end up doing a bunch of that kind of stuff over the next week.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. Yeah,
I guess that's about that.
Yeah, no, you reminded me that I have finished printing the deck box that you requested I print, and I have to print out some cosplay accessories for my wife. And then I also have to work on building the box for the Momir Vig machine, because it's still just like a pile of wires on my craft desk. But fun times. I'm excited.
Fun times. I'm also excited.
All right. Well, with that, if you want to email us about any things we talked about on this podcast, you can send dirtsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@dirtsplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/dirtsplaygames, youtube.com/dirtsplaygames, when these go out live. All the links will be down in the description. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
I have nothing that I'm looking to promote.
Well, with that, and then I'm going to say, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.